Welcome back. In this video, I'm going to share with you a new story. It's about radio pioneers who pulled words, music, and world events out of thin air. This is the story. Today, we will tell about several men who influenced the development of radio. Some people say radio was invented by Guglielmo Marconi of Italy. Marconi sent the first radio communication signal through the air in 1895. In fact, no one person can be called the inventor of a radio. Many people, including several Americans, helped to develop radio. You may not know their names. However, their work affected many people. Over the years, radio has become one of the most important forms of communication. It can be used for two-way communication, such as between a ship and land. Scientists even use radio to communicate into space. And radio broadcasts let people send words, music, and information to any part of the world. The first experimental radio broadcasts in the United States were made in the early 1900s. One of the first broadcasts came from the Metropolitan Opera House in New York City in 1910. It included music by the great singer Enrico Caruso. An American inventor, Lee DeForest, produced that broadcast. Only few people could hear the broadcast. Some were people in the New York area who had built radio receivers. Some ships at sea and military radio stations received the broadcast. Many newspapers of the day reported on the event. The name of the Lee DeForest became part of broadcasting history. DeForest developed some of the technology used in early radio. During his lifetime, he invented hundreds of devices that were used in telephones, shortwave radio broadcast, and similar technology. His most famous invention was the vacuum tube or electron tube. In 1906, the electron tube was considered the single most important development in electronics. The device made it possible to send radio signals and to send them over long distances. It was a major reason for the fast growth of the electronic and communication industries in the early part of the 20th century. Edwin Armstrong was another American inventor who was important in the development of electronics and radio communication. Armstrong developed technology that helped to improve radio reception. He discovered ways to limit unwanted radio signals. Edwin Armstrong was a leader in using radio to reproduce sound clearly. This process became known as frequency modulation or FM radio. FM radio provided better sounds, reproduction, and less noise or interference than traditional AM radio. Armstrong also developed radio receivers that became widely used. Many experts say station KDKA in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, was the first American radio station. It broadcast the result of the American presidential election in November 1920. That is generally considered the start of a professional radio broadcasting in the United States. Soon, radio stations began to appear in other areas. In 1922, two stations in New York State joined together to broadcast the championship game of American baseball. The stations were connected by telephone lines. These permitted them to share the same program. It was one of the first examples of radio network. By the middle of the 1920s, there were two main radio networks in the United States. The National Broadcasting Corporation, NBC, was formed by the Radio Corporation of America. The other network was the Columbia Broadcasting System, called CBS. The networks provided programs to radio stations across the country. Local stations created very few programs. What the listener heard in New York was often heard in Los Angeles, California, and other cities. David Sanoff was the man responsible for NBC. As a younger man, Sanoff had taught himself Morse code. He got a job with the Marconi Wireless Telegraph Company, where he worked as a telegraph operator. He was on duty when the passenger ship Titanic sank in the Atlantic Ocean in 1912. Sanoff helped the rescue effort by informing other ships about the accident. He understood that someone using radio could affect many lives. By 1921, Sanoff was an official of the Radio Corporation of America. He pushed RCA to enter broadcasting. The company soon earned huge profits. 5 years later, David Sanoff helped create NBC. David Sanoff developed the theory of broadcasting. This was very different from the communication between two people speaking to each other on a telephone. Radio meant that someone could speak to millions of people. William Espalier developed another radio network. In 1928, Espalier left his family's business. He spent several $100,000 on several radio stations. These stations became known as the Columbia Broadcasting System. Espalier's friends and advisors told him that he had made a huge mistake. They said his dream of building a large and important radio network would never come true. Espalier did not listen to them. Instead, he went to see the heads of some of the largest American companies to get their financial support for his network. Then Espalier searched for the best people he could find to produce the radio shows and news programming he wanted. He paid them well. William Espalier was always looking for people with special skills. One night, he attended a show by the popular Tommy Dorsey Band. A young man with the group sang during the performance. His name was Frank Sinatra. Sinatra soon had his own program with CBS, Espalier's radio network. Radio was extremely popular in the United States between the late 1920s and the early 1950s. This period is known as the Golden Age of broadcasting. During this period, families gathered in their living rooms every night to listen to radio shows. Children hurried home from school to hear shows created for them. In the daytime, millions of women listened to radio plays called soap operas. They were called soap operas because companies that make soap paid for the shows. Radio influenced the way many people felt about their community and the world. It permitted them to sit at home and hear what was happening in other areas. During World War II, people could hear the voice of world leaders such as American President Franklin Roosevelt. Listeners also could hear the voice voices of reporters covering World War II. Edwin Armstrong became famous for reporting about the war. People sometimes could hear guns and bombs exploding during his report. In 1937, Edwin Armstrong was the only representative of CBS in Europe. Marrow built a team of news reporters whose name would become well known to listeners. Marrow and reporter William Shearer made broadcasting history in 1938. They organized a special broadcast with European reaction to the seizure of Austria by Nazi Germany. The show had reports from London, Berlin, Paris, and Rome. It was a huge success. In the United States, the rise of television in the 1950s ended the golden age of broadcasting, radio broadcasting. More and more people start to watch television. Most of the popular shows disappear from radio. Many people believed television could cause radio broadcasting to become unimportant. However, the number of radio listeners continues to grow. Most experts say radio will continue to be important during this century. And this is the story. This story reminds me an anecdote when in 1956 I was just 10 years old and I had the opportunity to listen. I still remember I was listening to the radio the story of Andrea Doria sank in the Atlantic Ocean. Also, one of the tragedy that I remember I was watching on TV was in 1963 when the former president JFK was killed in Dallas. Thank you for watching. See you on the next video. Bye-bye.